to Miami Total Football Radio. I'm Eric Krakauer, still socially distanced from Franco Panizo, who is stuck in his bunker as Florida, like much of the country, finds itself in the grip of COVID-19 once again. The virus spiraling out of control with daily record spikes, and MLS just a couple of weeks away from kicking off its Mls Is Back Tournament in Orlando. I am psyched, Franco. How are you feeling?
Yeah, man, it's going to be interesting to see how things unfold, but it's exciting because teams have started to arrive in Orlando. So from a sporting aspect, things are starting to get a little more real, and that's, for all of soccer heads and all us soccer followers and fans, it's exciting times that we're going to see local soccer return.
It's big soccer heads, not just soccer heads, my friend. Come on, get it right. We're going to talk a little bit about COVID when we talk about the tournament. But before we kick things off, there's a lot of news about Inter Miami and MLS in general. And Franco, you have had your finger on the MLS pulse, and it is quickening. But again, before we kick things off, a little reminder that you can subscribe to our pod at Apple Podcasts, and you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Franco keeps those platforms fresh with content, including latest news and analysis about all things Inter Miami and
Spotify
some things.
and YouTube too.
Oh, and Spotify and YouTube
man.
too.
Can't forget everything. We got it all now. We're all over the place. I know.
Every single platform is populated with Miami Total Football Radio information. Yeah, there you go.
It's we're growing and growing and growing, which is a good sign. So, as you would say, let's get to it.
We have lots to discuss, Franco, but we'll start with squad news. One confirmed signing, one close to being confirmed, and lots of remaining roster questions. Inter Miami announced today the signing of 30-year-old free agent Brek Shea, drafted by Dallas as the second overall pick in the 2008 MLS Super Draft. Shea most recently played for Atlanta United, where he suffered an ACL rupture. Before that, Brek Shea played for Stoke City, Barnsley, Birmingham City, Orlando City, and the Vancouver Whitecaps. Franco, what do you make of this move? You had reported that he was training with a USL affiliate. So tell us about Brek Shea and what he will bring to Inter Miami.
Well, yeah, so it wasn't a USL affiliate. It's Inter Miami's second team, the USL team that Inter Miami operates and runs, Fort Lauderdale CF Club de Futbol.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I'm just I'm a stickler for the details sometimes. So as for Brek Shea, he's a depth signing. He's an option there that will provide cover at left back, at left wing, for Matias Pellegrini and for Ben Sweat. He's not a starter at this point in his career. Like you just mentioned, he's been at 7 clubs in the last 7 years. He's a journeyman at this point of his career. He's not the player that many people thought he would be when he broke out at FC Dallas so many years ago, nor when he was with the U.S. men's national team. He's definitely lost some of that hunger and some of that fire that he had initially. He's not that same player anymore, but he still provides that athleticism, that speed, and that size and experience, and MLS experience. So he'll add something to the group, and he will provide another capable option. Again, he's not going to be an everyday or an every game starter at this point, but he's a good option to have off the bench, especially ahead of a tournament like the one that Miami's heading into, the MLS Is Back Tournament, where games come quick, and you're going to have to rely on some bench players to come off and put in some good minutes. So I think for a depth signing, it's a good signing, but still some questions as to how the rest of the roster fills out, which I'm sure we'll get to.
He is fully fit, and that's great news. And it's interesting because that left side of Inter Miami's squad is pretty decent. I mean, you mentioned Ben Sweat, who for me is one of the best left backs in the league. He did so well for NYCFC, and I thought he looked good in the first 2 games for Inter Miami. You got Mikey Ambrose, who also came from Atlanta. So I think Brek Shea can certainly put in a shift as a left back. As you mentioned before, he can also play further upfield. And during his time in Atlanta, I actually thought he ended up playing more than expected. And until that injury, which came against Seattle, the Seattle Sounders, if I'm not mistaken, he seemed like a pretty important piece, or was becoming an important piece for Frank de Boer. So I think this is a good move, a good squad move. He's 30 years old. He still has some acceleration in his legs. He's got a very good cross, good set piece taker. So interesting to see how this will pan out. Not the only signing, though, Franco, that has been in the works. Inter Miami have also reportedly agreed to lure Leandro Gonzalez Perez after a short stint with Xolos in Liga MX. He only signed in January. I think he made something like 14 or 15 appearances for Xolos before the season was interrupted by COVID. And now, as most people know who follow the game, Liga MX has actually been canceled. The season has been canceled. So this seems to be pretty much done and dusted. It just needs to be announced.
Yeah, so the transfer window hasn't been given the green light by MLS. As soon as that is given the green light, as soon as the league says, all right, teams, you can go sign players from other leagues and pay transfer fees, it is widely expected that Leandro Gonzalez Perez will be a member of Inter Miami. And he'll, obviously, for people that might not be familiar with who he is, he's a center back, is at Club Tijuana right now, but previously played at Atlanta United. He was one of the best center backs in Major League Soccer during his 3 seasons with Atlanta United, helped them win a couple of trophies, including the 2018 MLS Cup. And he's a tough defender, a good defender, Argentine center back, probably a little temperamental, and can get the occasional...
a little rash.
Can get the occasional unnecessary yellow card, but he is definitely a talented center back. Again, he was one of the best center backs in the entire league during his time with Atlanta, and he's only 6 months removed. He went to Tijuana in January, and from all accounts, he didn't even want to leave Atlanta. It just was a matter of differences with the new head coach, Frank de Boer, and that's what kind of led to his exit. But he wanted to stay in MLS, so maybe I shouldn't say he didn't want to leave Atlanta. He didn't want to leave MLS, but things didn't play out that way. However, he looks like he's coming back. He'll be reunited with Paul McDonough, who obviously had a hand in signing him in Atlanta, which also noteworthy. Paul McDonough used to be Brek Shea's agent years ago. And he signed him in Orlando when Paul McDonough was building the Orlando City roster. And it's no coincidence now that he popped up again back in March when I reported that he was training with Fort Lauderdale CF and potentially going to play for them because he was coming back from the knee injury, significant knee injury. Obviously, COVID-19 put a halt to Fort Lauderdale CF's season in the USL, just as it did with Inter Miami and MLS. But he's healthy now, and they signed him. So these are 2 additions that Inter Miami's looking to make right before the start of this tournament. 2 players that could certainly contribute in some capacity. Obviously, again, Gonzalez Perez is not official, so I don't want to make it sound like it's official, but it sounds like it's just a matter of getting the green light from MLS, and when that happens, then he'll be on the roster.
It looks like it's going to happen. The former River Plate youth product is on the allocation list, and Inter Miami are number 1 in the allocation order after LAFC signed Andy Nahar earlier this month. Andy Nahar, like Brek Shea, was training, albeit with the LAFC first team, and he comes over from Europe. This comes as a surprise. I don't think a lot of people saw this coming. Another MLS Cup winner in the squad is definitely a good thing, but I mentioned the allocation list. Do you want to explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah, sure. So allocation order, MLS allocation order, is a player signing mechanism that essentially ranks teams 1 through however many teams are in the league in a given year. In this case, for this season, it's 1 through 26. Normally, the team with the worst record takes the number 1 spot entering a new season, a new year. However, this season, because there were two expansion teams, Miami and Nashville took up the first two spots. However, LAFC ended up using their spot because they were in the number one spot. They traded with Nashville, and they had that number one spot. So they used that to sign Andy Nahar a couple weeks ago, and that made Inter Miami the number one team in the allocation order because LAFC then, after using it to sign Andy Nahar, goes to the bottom of the list. Right. So Inter Miami took the top spot, and they've used it apparently to sign Leandro Gonzalez Perez. And
one of the sorry to interrupt, one of the many nebulous mechanisms that MLS has, like TAM, which is targeted targeted allocation money, and GAM, general allocation money, and all that other good stuff that the league has created in order to not only add parity but also strengthen squads.
Yeah, so this is just a method to sign players, and there's only certain players fit the criteria to be on this allocation list. It's not like Brek Shea, he was a free agent. Inter Miami was just able to sign him outright. It's a certain criteria that players meet, and we won't bog the listeners down with the details because in MLS, as things can get, it's very complex. But because he was transferred to Tijuana, there was a transfer fee involved, and in him leaving MLS, he qualified for making the list. And That's why Inter Miami is reportedly going to pay a transfer fee to bring him back to MLS and to bring him to Inter Miami. Now, the question is, with his looming arrival, how does that affect the center back situation? How does that affect Roman Torres, Nico Figal, Andres Reyes, Christian McCoon? How does that affect all their playing times? And, I think for me, and you'll see an article on SBIsoccer.com as soon as the move is announced. I think for me, it signals the end of Roman Torres' short stint as a starter or as an every game starter for Inter Miami. I think we talked about this weeks ago or months ago at this point, actually. Roman Torres' passing is not necessarily his forte, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you're Inter Miami and you're trying to build this play out of the back system. Obviously, he got red carded or he got sent off in that week 2 loss to DC United, and he was a big culprit in the foul or in the play that led to him getting sent off because he passed the ball right up the field to Julian Gressel under not much pressure at all, and Gressel came back the other way, and obviously they were fighting for the ball, and the ball bounces off Roman Torres' arm, and he gets the ejection. So I think if you have Leandro Gonzalez Perez, you're going to start him, and you're going to start him next to Nico Figal. You're going to go with that Argentine center back duo, and I think that means Roman Torres will go to the bench, and he will become a depth option at that position. And I know that Inter Miami did play three center backs in
that's what I was going to say.
Game. But I think Andres Reyes has with that performance and how high Inter Miami is on him, I think Andres Reyes has surpassed Roman Torres on the depth chart.
I think you might be right. Andres Reyes, especially against DC United, looked in that game. He looked very good. Figal has probably been the standout player for Inter Miami in both games, and then you have that boneheaded mistake by Roman Torres against DC United, which flipped that game on its head when Inter Miami, I thought, were the better team. But this really, I mentioned before, the left back situation is pretty good for Inter Miami. It's a strength on this team, and now you look at the center back position, and you have to say that Inter Miami right now have a lot of options, and maybe Roman Torres will take a step back in terms of being an every week starter, but he certainly has the experience there and even the possibility of seeing Roman Torres, Figal, and Gonzalez Perez. That's a pretty good center back trio if Diego Alonso does decide to go with 3 men at the back. Moving on, just real quick, McDonough said about a week ago or 2 weeks ago that Inter Miami were looking to make 3 significant signings. Now, we know that Gonzalez Perez, if this materializes, is one of them. Perhaps Brek Shea is the other. That leaves one piece. or maybe two. Is Brek Shea one of the significant signings that McDonough was talking about?
I honestly think so. It's just my opinion that I believe so. When McDonough spoke 2 weeks ago and he made that statement, he was asked what positions he was looking for. He said he was looking for an attacker, which was, from what everyone interpreted and based on what they said in the past, is a striker, the DP number 9, that Inter Miami has long been in search of. He said a box-to-box center midfielder, number 8, that, again, Inter Miami has said publicly for months that they've been searching. That's the role or the void that Agustin Almendra was supposed to fill months ago, the Boca Juniors center midfielder, but that move obviously never transpired. And he said they could use the allocation order on a wide spot, or wide or attacking spot. They ended up going with a wide player. They didn't use the allocation order to sign that wide player. They ended up signing Brek Shea, who, again, he fits that bill of being able to play out wide, either in left back or left mid or left wing. And they surprised by signing a center back, or they're about to sign a center back, in Gonzalez Perez. Now, the issue is, if they've filled 2 of these 3 roster spots, do they now have enough space on the roster? Because there's only a 30-man limit. Do they have enough space to sign a center midfielder and a striker? It remains to be seen how they operate, how they maneuver through that. But if it comes down to one or the other, I think they're going to go for the DP striker. I mean, there's a reason why Inter Miami haven't given the number 9 to anybody on the squad yet. So maybe they can still find a way to sign both the striker and a center midfielder. If they do, maybe they have to waive somebody or trade somebody or sell somebody. Those are all possibilities. But I think they have enough flexibility cap-wise to sign 2 more players, but I don't know if they have enough roster space. Because, again, there is a limit to how many players you can hold on a squad. So that remains to be seen. But it looks like Inter Miami's trying to make these moves. He said he was trying to sign these 3 significant pieces as soon as possible, potentially before the start of the Mls Is Back Tournament, if it was permitted. So we might not be done hearing news in terms of player signings just yet.
And I think that's exciting for Inter Miami supporters, particularly the point that you made about the number 9 jersey, and lots of players in Europe who are leaving clubs, who are getting older, and the same names that get mentioned over and over again. Luis Suarez, by the way, looking less sharp than usual since coming back from his injury at Barcelona.
I'm going to say really quickly, since you cover a lot of European soccer and you broadcast a lot of these games for beIN Sports. Out of the European options that may be out there, obviously Inter Miami gets linked with a lot of names, but if you could just quickly say 1 or 2 options that you think would be realistic, good selections for that DP number 9, who would you pick? I don't know, you mentioned Suarez, because I was going to go there. I was going to say, I know his contract's running out at Barcelona. There hasn't been much in the media or in the transfer wire about his future, where he's going. I haven't seen him linked with certain teams like Edison Cavani is. He's leaving PSG, and he's been linked with Atletico Madrid and a number of other clubs, but I haven't seen as much of media frenzy when it comes to Luis Suarez's future, and I think he could be that number 9. I think he fits how they want to play. I think he's lethal. I think he'd be the best striker in MLS, and he's obviously Uruguayan. Diego Alonso's Uruguayan. There's a little extra bridge there.
Yeah, and Diego Alonso as well played in La Liga for quite some time with Valencia, for example. Look, I think Luis Suarez would be a perfect fit. I think that Cavani would be a perfect fit. Cavani is definitely leaving PSG. They're not renewing his contract. He doesn't want to renew the contract. They've even tried to extend him for a few months so that he plays in the Champions League, but he's decided not to do that, which is surprising. His preferred destination is Atletico Madrid, but I'm not sure that's going to happen, and I don't think either one of those guys would look at the possibility of moving to Inter Miami negatively. I think they would be very excited to do so. I think the biggest question insofar as Luis Suarez is concerned is what happens with Lautaro Martinez and Barcelona. Lautaro Martinez, the Argentine, is at Inter. He is a terrific player. He's got $120-something million release clause. Barcelona don't have money, but they're trying to finagle any way possible to make that move happen. If it does, I would not be surprised if Luis Suarez makes a move to MLS, and Inter Miami, obviously the preferred destination. But I will tell you this, Franco, and I forgot to mention to you, I had a conversation with somebody who is very close to a lot of agents and a lot of sources, and he told me that there is a push being made, at least in the part of agents, for James Rodriguez to move to Inter Miami. Now, I don't know what the interest level is on the side of the club, but I do believe this guy usually gives me good information, and I do believe that if he says that the people who represent James Rodriguez are trying to make that move happen, I think they are trying to make that move happen. But it goes back to the point that you were making, that he doesn't necessarily seem to fit the hole that McDonough and Alonso are trying to plug up.
Well, so what would be interesting about what you just said, what you're reporting here on the show, is that Paul McDonough, when he spoke again about the position, and I think I said it a little bit earlier ago, he didn't say outright that they were looking for a number 9 anymore. He said they were looking for a DP attacker. He didn't say in the number 9 position. If James, and we're going to say if, I'm going to very, very put an emphasis on the word if James, if that link, if that report is real, if there's real substance to that, then they could fill that last DP spot they have, let's say with James, put him in the attacking midfield spot, the number 10 spot. You drop Rodolfo Pizarro into a center mid box-to-box spot.
You can even put him on the wings.
That's where Rodolfo Pizarro played previously in his career. Earlier in his career, before he played more advanced like he is now, he played more as a box-to-box number 8. Something that I believe Diego Alonso somewhat mentioned on a conference call 2 or 3 weeks ago. Somebody asked him about Rodolfo Pizarro, just a general question. I think it was a Mexican media member that just asked a general question about Rodolfo Pizarro, and he kind of said, he's got the ability to pick out passes and create an impact in the attacking third, but he also has the engine of a number 8, of being able to play two ways and run all over the field and connect with passes. So I thought, hey, listen, if what you're saying has real substance, then I could definitely see a situation where James is the DP. They don't go for a number 9. They just go with what they've got, whether it's Julian Carranza, Robbie Robinson, or Juan Agudelo, one of those three. And the expectation then would be that one of them would improve vastly enough with a James playing behind them that they could score goals or enough goals to push Inter Miami to another level. So that's very interesting.
No, and I've mentioned this before on this show, and I've mentioned it when I've talked about this for beIN Sports. I think James would be crazy to turn down the money that he would get, would be paid to play in Miami. And considering the fact that he is a bit part player at Real Madrid, he started the other day, but he wasn't impactful, and he said himself that he was ready to leave in January. He was ready to leave in January with Atletico Madrid interested in his signing. That never happened because Real Madrid didn't accept the move. So I think who knows? It might be a possibility, and who wouldn't want to see a bona fide Colombian international superstar playing for Inter Miami? I know I would. All right, let's talk about the aptly named MLS Is Back Tournament. We have a schedule. Mark your calendars. Inter Miami will kick things off against Orlando City July the 8th. That's 2 weeks away. That's followed by a game against the Chicago Fire on the 14th, and then the Philadelphia Union on the 19th. There's also been a slight tweak to the rules as reported by Franco. Group A, Inter Miami's group, has 6 teams. Originally, only 2 would qualify directly, with the 4 best third-place teams in all the groups making it to the knockout stages as well. Well, now 3 teams will qualify from Group A, plus the 3 best third-place teams from whatever group they qualify for. So this is good news for Inter Miami, an added slot to qualify for the knockout stages. And now that we have a calendar, now that we have dates, this is becoming very palpable. It's almost like you can smell an MLS Adidas ball being kicked.
So it's good news for Inter Miami. It's good news for every team in Group A, because now you have 3 guaranteed spots for the knockout rounds, for the round of 16. Before, it was 2 guaranteed spots, like you said, and maybe 1 more depending on how everything else played out, which was a bit unfair on the balance of things on the whole. I believe Yahoo.com came out with an article with the actual numbers, the math behind what percentage every team had. Obviously in Group A it was much lower than the rest of the groups, because the rest of the groups are filled with 4 teams apiece. So now things are a little more balanced. Obviously it's still not 100% balanced. Again, Group A is the only group with 6 teams. Not every team will play one another, but this rule change helps the chances that Inter Miami or all the other 5 teams can move on, because now there's a guaranteed extra spot. So good on MLS for realizing that and making that change, as it evens the playing field a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a great adjustment. And just think, we talked about the last time we recorded a pod, we talked about the possibility of this tournament becoming a thing depending on its popularity and the money that will be funneled in. And by the way, you should have asked me how you smell a ball being kicked and not hear a ball being kicked, Franco. You could have caught me on that one.
You smell the grass. You smell, especially in Florida, you smell that morning grass.
That's exactly what I was doing. I was thinking of the grass and not necessarily the ball. But I think this is a really good thing. But the way that the league is growing, with seemingly 2 teams added every year, but at some point, let's say 2025. Each one of these groups may have something like 10 teams at the rate of MLS growth right now. But yes, it's a good move. It's a good move by MLS. It certainly makes everything a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I think, again, it helps. If we're talking just Inter Miami, it now helps their chances. Obviously, they have a tough matchup against the Philadelphia Union. We touched on that last episode. That is a tough opponent, and the schedule has changed, because initially it was believed that Inter Miami, based on the format and based on the schedules we got on the media side of how the matchups would be, it was supposed to be Inter Miami Orlando City, which remains. Then it was going to be Inter Miami Philadelphia Union in the second game, and then Inter Miami Chicago Fire in the third game, the group stage finale for Inter Miami. Now, maybe after TV discussions and obviously that took a while to hammer out the details. That's why the schedule was just released this week with the TV broadcast info. Now the Chicago Fire game versus Inter Miami is the second group game for Inter Miami, and the final game is the Philadelphia Union Inter Miami game again,
which is arguably the toughest game of that group. I actually flew to Atlanta to watch their playoff game against Atlanta United. They are well organized, with a pretty strong spine. So hopefully by that point, Inter Miami will have, hopefully for Inter Miami, they'll have 2 wins in their bag, or in the bag.
Yeah, I mean they could be qualified if they win those first 2 games. By that point they could be qualified. Right. It can be a little bit of a rotation, or a little bit of smoother sailing in terms of there's no urgent need to to win that game. Obviously, they're probably going to want to win. There's regular season points on the line, as well as where you finish in the group, and where that takes you against a deemed weaker opponent in the knockout rounds. But there's no urgent need to have to win that game to survive. If you win the first 2, you can rest players that maybe have a little bit of a knock or niggling injury, so that helps. So for Inter Miami, the schedule change or adjustment that came with the broadcast info is a plus.
It is, and of course they'll feel a lot of pressure to win that first game against Orlando City because that is a new budding rivalry. We'll talk about that a little bit more in our question and answer segment. I do want to talk about something that, Franco, you and I have discussed on and off for months now, even before every league in the world except in Belarus and a couple of other places was suspended. It is important to note that this competition is kicking off as the infection rates for the coronavirus, for COVID-19, are spiking, are increasing at an alarming rate. A few days ago, the Orlando Pride in the NWSL announced that they were pulling out of their tournament, which starts this Saturday in Utah, because 6 of its players and 4 staff members tested positive for COVID. Now, according to reports, some of the players had gone to a bar in Orlando. Yes, bars are open, and then they infected each other and the staff members. This is important context because I think they're at the beginning of when this tournament was being discussed, when they were having the talks with ownership. Why is the term escaping me right now? The
negotiations. The
negotiations, but with the I can't think of it right now. But when they were negotiating, I think that there were some concerns about the length of the tournament, how long players would be separated from their loved ones, but also the possibility of becoming infected. Now, I think that in an insulated tournament, perhaps the likelihood of getting COVID is decreased because you would think that the league will take every precaution. They will have every measure basically detailed as we've seen in Europe. But this is certainly disconcerting, right? And you have to think that some players, Maxi Morales, in fact, was a player who was a little bit uneasy about playing in this tournament, but he said that he's coming. You have to think that a lot of players have that in the backs of their minds.
Well, so just to quickly touch on the Orlando Pride situation, there was news that came out right before, or a couple hours before we jumped on here. Now that some of those players that tested positive initially on follow-up tests, they've tested negative. So now there's questions on whether they have it for real or not, and whether if they don't, whether Orlando Pride can get back into the NWSL tournament. But going back to the main point that you're bringing up about the concern, yes, there is a concern, but MLS is going to go forward with this tournament. There will be cases. There have been cases that have been reported. Colorado Rapids, I think, announced 2 cases this week alone, and there's going to be more cases. That said, it was also reported yesterday that by The Athletic that MLS does not require teams to even reveal that they have players with positive cases. We've seen some announcements made, but that's just by team choice or by just their will. They do not have to release any information with regards to positive testing. We've seen some. There's apparently been some teams that have had positive cases. I think I read the Seattle Sounders were one. A player tested positive. They never made an announcement. The player is reportedly recovered, and he's back in full training with the Sounders. And there are probably other cases like that across the league where teams are not necessarily coming out and saying, hey, we have X amount of players or one player with coronavirus. So it is concerning, but I think this tournament's going to go full steam ahead, especially now that the details have been ironed out with the TV broadcast, and teams have started to arrive. Teams have started to arrive in Orlando. San Jose Earthquakes arrived yesterday, Wednesday. Orlando City, obviously the local team, made the trip into the resort today. So teams are starting to arrive,
which is like a 20-minute drive. Yeah,
yeah. They stopped at Sonic on the way there. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, it's getting real. The tournament's gaining steam. More and more teams are expected to arrive in the coming days. Inter Miami leaves next Wednesday, July 1st. So everything's pointing towards this happening, even with all the cases and the numbers going up.
Yeah, I don't think it's look. I don't think it's going to be canceled. I'm pretty sure that MLS had this in mind, that this was always going to be a possibility, but it is something to be concerned about. And by the way, the term I was looking for is collective bargaining agreement. that's what I was.
The good old CBA.
The CBA. That is what I was talking about. All right, the question and answer segment is coming up next. Okay, as per usual, we finish every show with a question and answer segment. We only had time for one question last week, but we will dedicate more time to more questions today. And Franco, you got to pick the questions, so I'll let you read them.
All right, so we're going to start with Carlos J. Flores at Midweight152 is his handle. He asks us, is the round of 16 already scheduled as to who group winner would face? So the answer to that is yes, there is. That round of 16 has been laid out. So we don't know the broadcast info for the round of 16. However, we do know the matchups. So July 25th, it'll be first place finisher in Group A versus a wild card finisher between B, C, D, and E. Then the second place finisher in Group A will play the second place finisher in Group C. July 26th, it'll be first place finisher in Group B versus the third place finisher in Group A. First place finisher in Group D versus the wild card in B, C, E, or F, depending on who finishes where. July 27th, first place finisher in Group C versus the wild card in A, B, D, or F. Then you have B2 versus F2. And then on July 28th, you have E1 versus D2, F1 versus E2. It's a lot. It's a lot of info there. A lot of letters.
Yeah, I was going to say, let me simplify it for you guys that are listening. Check out Franco Panizo's handle on Twitter, and he wrote an article about this. That would be the best way to go.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to explain it there as easily as I could, and trying to say which I should have just gone with just letters and numbers, but
it's okay.
The word.
Okay.
I'm a words guy, so all the words started popping into my head.
It was a valiant attempt, and I appreciate it, and so does the person who tweeted that question. But again, check out Franco Panizo's Twitter handle for all things schedule, MLS Is Back Tournament schedule.
Well,
Next question.
I'll just quickly add something to that, because obviously the person that asked is an Inter Miami follower, an Inter Miami fan. The dates you need to clear on your calendar or set your DVR for are July 25th or July 26th, because Inter Miami is in Group A. A1, A2, and A3 will play on July 25th and July 26th. A1 and A2 again on the 25th, A3 on the 26th. Okay, so next question. This one comes from Joseph E. His handle is at JosephJeem1. Schedule is out. What's the top 3 games you want to watch other than the Inter Miami games? I'll let you give me 1 or 2, and then I'll chime in with 1 or 2. That way we can make a combined 3 or 4 here.
Oh, that's a very good question. Okay, I think Atlanta United versus the Red Bulls is going to be a good one. That's July 11th. Montreal Impact against Toronto FC is always an interesting game, and of course El Tráfico, my friend, LAFC versus the LA Galaxy on the 18th.
So those are your 3. You went all 3, huh?
Yeah, I went all 3. Where's that? Wait.
I said you could just pick. I said you could pick 2, and then I would pick 2, and then we could just have a combined 4. But you could go all 3, and then I'll just go all 3.
Well, I already did. I already jumped the gun.
Well, right, because now I feel like I would repeat. Like if I had my say, obviously I'd tell you LA versus LAFC is definitely a must watch.
Especially after the conference semifinals last year.
Yeah, exactly.
Hot fire.
And I mean, it's LA versus LA. Even though there won't be fans in the stands, it's still going to be a heck of a game. Obviously, I like Atlanta versus the New York Red Bulls. It's always a chippy affair. But if I'm going to go a little bit a different route, obviously Cincinnati versus Columbus
Crew.
is an interesting one.
It's a new rivalry.
Maybe not the most high profile one of the bunch, but it's definitely an interesting one in the bunch.
Well, there's a great subplot there, and that's Yapstam's debut as FC Cincinnati coach, particularly after that unveiling was a total disaster, corrected brilliantly by Cincinnati's PR team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that one has those added elements. Again, it's not the most high profile matchup, but it's an interesting one. It is a rivalry, a derby, maybe a Clasico. We'll get to that in a second. And then if I had to pick one last one, out of the remaining bunch that you haven't said, Real Salt Lake Sporting Kansas City is probably an interesting one. They have some history themselves.
Yep.
So those would be the three that I would take aside from the ones you've mentioned. All right. So the next question.
Final question.
No, we got two more. We've got two more.
Oh, we got two more? Never mind. Okay. We're doing four, not three. Okay.
The next one comes from at G Delenis. He says, "When is a Clasico not a Clasico?" Serious question. And he says that because we debated this week on Twitter about this subject. So
when is a Clasico not a Clasico?
Yeah, so I mean, if you want some quick backstory, it's essentially I've been referencing the Orlando City Inter Miami matchup as the Sunshine Clasico. In Spanish,
I think that's a good name.
In Spanish, it would be El Clásico del Sol, which fits for Miami, but in English, for the English fans and English followers, it's also Sunshine Clasico is very straightforward, easy to say. I've been referencing that. We did a poll on SBIsoccer.com that actually ended up being the first place finisher in our poll that lasted a week. And I think it's a good name, but there are people out there that are saying it's not a Clasico. Clásicos are only between the best teams in a league, and they have different definitions for what a Clasico is. To me, there is no criteria for a Clásico. Everyone thinks of El Clásico and they think of Barcelona, Real Madrid. Fair enough. But there are Clásicos all over South America where it's not necessarily an international team or a team with a lot of international flair or power. There's Clásicos in Bolivia. There's Clásicos
in your country, Alianza against Universitario, for example. But there's a history there.
There's history there, but so is like, do they have to play a certain amount of games for the rivalry to be named? Listen, Clásico does not mean like I get where English speakers would translate it like to a classic and just think like, well, this isn't a classic because they've never played before. Orlando has not been a very good team in Major League Soccer. But it's not the word Clásico doesn't, when we're using it in soccer terms in Spanish, is not meant for like the literal translation for classic. It just means derby. It means rivalry. Like that's essentially what the Clásico is. So that's why you see Alianza La U is a Clásico in Peru. The strongest versus Bolívar or el Clásico in Bolivia. So again, the Clásico for me it just means rivalry, and I think Sunshine Clasico fits pretty well. It rolls off the tongue fairly easily. Imagine people in Europe being like, "Hey, we can go to the Sunshine. We're gonna go to the Sunshine Clasico next weekend once people can actually attend games again." So I think the name fits. People don't have to call it that if they don't want to. I would prefer. I think this is a better name than El Tráfico. I loathe and despise El Tráfico. I know that people in LA love it.
I like it.
Oh, I hate it. Hey, look,
I like it.
Even Bob Bradley came out against it.
Who cares? I mean, Bob Bradley comes out against a lot of things. And how about the Humidity Clasico? That's not a bad one, right? Humidity Clasico? No?
Humedad Clasico in Spanish? I don't know. It doesn't roll off the tongue the same way.
I don't.
And the only reason the only reason we didn't go with Sunshine Derby on the poll, why we didn't list that, if anybody ends up going that far back and asking, is because the El Derby del Sol in Italian, I don't speak Italian, but in Italian, that derby already exists in Italy. So Sunshine Clasico does not exist. I think it'd be a good fit. Again, nobody has to call it that. You can call it that if you want. I'm gonna keep calling it that. I think it's a good name.
There are lots of classics, so it wouldn't even matter if we stole one from Serie A, to be honest. But I think that is a good one. and MLS is a fairly new league compared to a lot of others, and they love formulas. They love to contrive rivalries like the Atlantic Cup. So why not? Let's start calling it the Sunshine Clasico. I think that's absolutely fine.
Absolutely.
That's a good one.
Better than so I don't know, man. MLS can come up with, when MLS forces things, MLS can come up with some really bad ones. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we got like the Sun Pass showdown or something silly like that, brother. So Sunshine Classico, again, nobody has to call it that if they don't want to. I think it has a nice ring to it. I will continue to reference that.
The purple and pink classic, or the pink and purple classic.
That's not even that's not a bad option. The only thing would be is what if down the road one of these teams changes colors, or that can happen.
It would never happen. Come on, the both stadiums, and I know that the Fort Lauderdale, it's temporary. Both stadiums have the colors. They're not going to knock them down.
Hey, Columbus Crew was all yellow. Now they're like black and yellow. The yellow's almost like an afterthought. So.
That is a good point.
And they almost left completely in Columbus. They almost went to Austin. That all came together, but never say never in MLS, brother. Okay, so
that is true.
Last question.
Final question.
Yep. So it's from our regular listener, our regular MTFer, Andres El Colombiano at @A_Hoyo16. With the rule change, does that change your hopes for Inter Miami or any other team in the group? And who does the Group A third place play in the last 16 round? Are they automatically top third place seed? So again, we just touched on that second part, so we won't go back into that. But does that change the hopes for Inter Miami? Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
That raises their chances to get out. Again, I think on the last show when we talked about it, I had them finishing third. I don't know if we got into that, but I definitely had that conversation with a colleague at some point. And I said, I think Inter Miami finishes third. They could get anywhere from 5 to 6 points. So 6 points maybe is good enough for second, probably good enough for second, but they might get 5, and then that might put them in third because again, not everybody plays everybody in Group A. Eric, what do you think?
I think this is good news for Inter Miami and any team in that group. Of course, it was initially before the rule tweak, they got the poop end of the stick being in that bigger group. The competition obviously was greater. So this is certainly a very good thing. And just to harken back to something we talked about in the last pod, which is that McDonough said that, they're in this tournament to win it, as well as in this tournament to see some real improvements. And I think that if you have a more realistic opportunity to succeed, which is that third spot, I think it may motivate the players to try and kick more ass. So I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, so that does it for the questions for this week. Again, if you want to ask any questions on a future show, because obviously the games are ramping up and there's going to be more and more news popping up as the games get closer and as the games go on. You can add us at MIA Total Futbol FUTBOL on Twitter and ask us, or you can do it on our direct Twitter handles at Franco Panizo, at Eric Krakauer. So yeah, I think that might have been our best Q&A session so far.
Yeah, I think so. That was a good sesh. Before we sign off, and we only have a couple of minutes here, just a quick word, Franco, on Jürgen Meinke, who until recently was the chief business officer at Inter Miami. He's now departed the club. We don't know the circumstances surrounding his exit. Franco, what does an Inter Miami supporter need to know about this? Yeah,
so I think that news came out a couple of weeks ago, the day after we last recorded, so we didn't get to speak about it on our last pod. Look, long story short, he was the chief business officer, the CBO. He is no longer with the team. We don't know if he was let go or if he decided to leave on his own. Details haven't come out about that. Probably won't for a little bit. What I do think is interesting is 2 months or a couple months before the announcement came, or before this news came out, sporting director Paul McDonough was starting to be referenced as the COO in press releases and in official news coming out of Inter Miami, coming out of the club. So at some point there was overlap where he was the COO and Jurgen Meinke was the CBO. And it seems now, judging what Paul McDonough said in press conferences and video conferences, seems like he's doing a little more of the business side now. He talked about the jersey sponsor when I asked him a couple of weeks ago. So it seems like they've given him some of Jurgen Meinke's role and maybe if
responsibilities.
If not all of it. We don't know exactly why, but listen, man, I've known Jurgen Meinke for years and years and years. He was head of PR or had an upper PR position at the New York Red Bulls when I first moved to the Northeast. When I left Florida, went to the Northeast to cover MLS and cover the New York Red Bulls. So I met him years ago, and he hasn't worked in that type of role, that business officer type of role, because after the Red Bulls, he came down to South Florida and worked at CONCACAF at their offices here in Miami. And again, he was in charge of PR. So the role he got with Inter Miami was something new to him. So again, I don't know if it was a matter of Inter Miami saying, look, he's not cut out for this job, he's not doing a good enough job, or if he said maybe, this isn't for me, or I don't know what the case is, but he is no longer with the club. It is somewhat significant, especially since Paul McDonough has now got his hand in that cookie jar as well, but we'll see how that unfolds.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the show, and as we mentioned earlier, and as you guys all know by now, the MLS Is Back tourney kicks off on July 8th with Inter Miami playing Orlando City in the Sunshine Derby or Clasico, whichever one.
Come on, man.
Clasico. My bad.
You gotta incorporate the Miami. You live in Aventura, brother. You gotta incorporate that Latin flavor. I mean, I saw your post on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. Your daughter's already starting to speak some Spanish, and she's like technically she has no Spanish blood in her, so
no,
or Latin blood in her. So
her grandmother is Venezuelan, but
okay.
it's not her mother who's speaking Spanish to her, but she does like to say gracias anytime you give her something. Franco, we are definitely doing dale. We are definitely doing one more pod, maybe two before the tournament kicks off. So for you guys who are listening, make sure you are aware of that, and as soon as that pod drops or those pods drop, we will let you know on all our social media platforms. But that is it for now. Until next time, big soccer heads.